Well, welcome. We're so glad that you're here today. We have a wonderful program today, Ada's Journey, and you're going to find out more about that as well as some other great stories from Andy Peck. But before we get started, let me introduce myself. My name is Lisa Oakley, and I'm Vice President and Curator of Education with the East Tennessee Historical Society. And we're also joined by Kim Mays in the back, who's working our social media and our Zoom friends. He's conducting all of the Zoom event, the streaming, and then we have Kelly Weatherly Sinclair, our Community Engagement Manager, who greeted you when you came in, and Dick Bendy, who is one of our right and left hands sometimes on particular days. We really appreciate Dick. He's one of our volunteers, and we're just so appreciative of you all being here, and hope you have a chance, I want to say, after the talk, come up and talk about the books, but also come up and learn some more from our living history box over here and spend some time finding out more with our guest. So I also wanted to make you aware of some upcoming events. For those of y'all that are members, you probably received this lecture card and went ahead and penciled some dates in. And we are finishing up our fall programming in November with two programs, beginning of the end, the Chattanooga trial of Jimmy Hoffa on November 2nd, and then Georgiana Vines, who was longtime columnist for the Sentinel. And she will be talking about her book, Newsmakers Not Covered by the Media Today, but she does a lot of reminiscing and talking about, she thought about a lot of the newsmakers she covered in the past in her column, and she kind of revisited each person's career and story and family and kind of brought it up to date. So please come out for that on November 16th. But we still have some stuff in October. October has been really busy, and we're very excited to have Andy here with us today. But we also are partnering with University of Tennessee's libraries, University of Tennessee Press, the Knoxville History Project, and we are hosting Bob Hutton here, Dr. Bob Hutton, who was with the history department at UT, and now he's in West Virginia. But he's kind of brought the history of the University of Tennessee up to date. So his new publication, Bearing the Torch, the University of Tennessee's 1794 to 2010, has been published. It'll be available that night, and he will be here at 6 p.m. on October the 27th. That's next Thursday, I believe. And so we would love to have you here for this. You can register, but I think it will be fine to walk in as well. But if you just grab one of these cards on the back table, it'll give you all that information. It has the website to find out more and to register for attendance, and they are streaming that as well. So then we have, for those of you all that want to have some fun, some festival fun, we have Monsters at the Museum on October 29th. That's something that Kelly Weatherly Sinclair and our educator Danny Manley Hood have been working on. So if you've been to our Monsters at the Museum before, we will have kind of tales of mourning customs in the Victorian era in the gallery. We'll have Karen Peterman doing that. We'll have fun activities for the kids and a costume contest, but we're also very privileged and honored to have some Cherokee oral historians that will be joining us from the Museum of the Cherokee Indian to talk about important stories to their history and to their oral history, because as many of us recognize and know, for the Cherokee and for indigenous peoples, those stories are critical to who they are, and even today. So they will share a number of those critical oral histories to the Cherokee culture. So that will be on October the 29th between 11 and 3, free admission, and we would love to have you all here. You can bring the young ones, or you yourself can come. No age limit, but there'll be something for everybody. And if you want to find out more specifically for the story, for those oral histories, you can always contact us. We don't have the agenda ready for the day today, but they will be presenting, we think, at least twice, and maybe here most of the day. We're just not sure for sure yet. And Laura Steele, I think, will be joining us as well. We're not sure if she will be in the building or doing kind of a mini walking tour, but we will find out more. And just go to our website, go to our Facebook page, Ken does a great job of keeping that up to date. And Kelly is the person, if you're a member, we would love for you to join. If you are not, Kelly is in charge of our membership program, and she's trying to do much more communication. We will be sending out publications and print materials, but she's also trying to keep lots of updates going through email, and so we're trying to get the information out there. So we still have some things going on, so we hope that we will see you all in the future as well. If you have any questions, feel free to ask before you leave. But now we want to get to Ada's journal. And we want to find out about these other incredible family stories from the Peck family. And we have Andy Peck with us today. He is the series editor for Cross Mountain Books, Pecks of Mossy Creek series, including Ada's journal and Emma's letters and Charley's novel. His books were featured during the 2022 Rose Glen Literary Festival, which was incredible in Sevierville, and they will, I assume, be hosting that again this year. So if you want to find out more about that, you can search and check with the Chamber in Sevierville or check with the Sevier County Public Library, the King Center there. He has also recently published Oblique City, Wolf Creek, Tennessee, a reprint of the 1894 business prospectus highlighting the beautiful city along the French Broad in Cocke County. Andy is the fifth great-grandson of the founders of Mossy Creek and third great-grandson to Emma Elizabeth Henderson Peck, original author of Ada's Journal. He is a devoted husband and father, and his son is here with him today. I'll let him introduce him here shortly. Military chaplain, family researcher, adventurer, and author. He has conducted book tours throughout East Tennessee and Western North Carolina, speaking for writers' groups and libraries. He has also appeared on Knoxville's Living East Tennessee television program. His current projects include Sawbones, The Life and Times of Dr. Isham Talbot Peck, and he loved the folks, Dr. Edward Jerome Peck of Hot Springs, North Carolina. And we are so glad to have the East Tennessee Historical Society added to your list of presentations. So thank you for being here with us today. Let's give a round of applause.
Thank you. We'll start with a video. All right, well, good afternoon. Good to see all of you. And I want to say special thanks to Lisa Oakley for all of her work in putting this together and all of the others that had a hand in it. Tim Yates in the bookstore I've known for the last few years. And glad to have some members of the Peck family here that have come down from the Adam Peck line and maybe others that I haven't had a chance to meet yet. But I am Andy Peck, and yeah, my son Hudson Peck, he's my middleest son. He's 10 years old, and he is skipping school to be here to share East Tennessee history with you. And, my passion is to connect folks with their history, to connect you with our history. And this, what started as just kind of an interest in family history, turned into discovering some documents that I found out had never been published, and I really wanted to share them, not just with my own family, but share them with the world. And so that's what has brought us here today. The living history table over here, basically in Ada's journal, you're going to learn about all of these different things that were common in the 19th century that aren't as common today. And so what we decided to do was try to get a lot of those different items and put them in that box. And so we've got cannonball from the Civil War, and we've got some real Confederate money over there, and we've got scrimshaw teeth, replica scrimshaw teeth, which was they would take whale teeth and etch into them and then put ink on them. And they're elaborate drawings, so feel free to touch and handle and look at those later. And then there's some bullets as well. But I wanted to share with you kind of how I came upon all of these materials, and then I want to try to stay focused as I can. Sometimes I get off on tangents, but to stay as focused as I can and get to the actual texts themselves, because what my books are primary source material, and I just introduce you to those primary sources. I try to let them speak for themselves, so that's what we're going to talk about today. About 5 years ago, my family said, Andy, would you put together a video for your grandma's birthday? My grandma B. Dot was turning 90. And I said, sure, I'd be happy to. And I reached out to my whole family and I said, could you send me pictures and videos and memories and things like that of B. Dot? And I said, you know what? I found out I've got some older family members that can't travel. In particular, my great aunt Net, who lives outside of McMinnville, Tennessee, in a wheelchair on a mountain by herself, and she doesn't travel. And so I called my great aunt Net and I said, hi, Aunt Net, I'm your great nephew, Andy. And we had never spoken on the phone. I'd met her maybe as a 5-year-old kid, but no memories of that. And after she shared some memories about my grandma B. Dot, I said, do you happen to know the name of your grandparents? Because really for me, my family history stopped with my great-grandpa. I knew his name. I knew my great-grandma's name, but I'd never met them. They had passed away before I was alive. And she said, well, of course, Dr. Edward Jerome Peck of Hot Springs, North Carolina. You know, there's a monument to him. And I said, what do you mean there's a monument to him? And I wrote down his name, and she told me my great-great-grandma's name. And so I eventually traveled, not too long after, a few months later, I traveled and I met with her. That's what that picture was from. But then I also traveled to Wolf Creek, Tennessee, which is, if you've never been there, it wouldn't surprise me, it's between Newport, Tennessee and Hot Springs, North Carolina. It is kind of down in the valley. It's now considered Del Rio, Tennessee. But Wolf Creek is right there, right before you get to North Carolina. You actually get through Wolf Creek, and then it says, welcome to Tennessee, and you've already missed Wolf Creek. So, but there's a sweet lady there named Betty Walker, who I have to check my Oblique City book, but she just turned 92. I dedicated my book Oblique City to her. But when I called her on the phone, I said, I'd gotten her name, I gotten her number, and I said, hi, Mrs. Walker, my name's Andy Peck. I'm the second great-grandson of Dr. Edward Jerome Peck. My great-aunt told me that there's a monument to him somewhere in the area. Have you ever heard of such a thing? And these are her words. I'd never spoken with this lady in my life. She said, Andy, I'm looking at a photograph of your second great-grandfather right now. That's what she said when I called her out of the blue. Across from, this is her living room, across from her in her living room is the chase that my second great-grandfather used to doctor in the Mountain Park Hotel, which is over in Hot Springs, North Carolina. And she said, well, I'm going to invite one of your cousins that you've never met before over. And so Ann Peck came over from Decatur, Georgia. She also has a home in Montreat, and she came over and I got to meet Ann. And so I just had the pleasure of meeting some older ladies throughout East Tennessee and Western North Carolina that have shared my history with me. And then others that had some photocopies and things like that of the documents that I eventually published. This is just a snippet of the monument that's there it's actually in Hot Springs in a Methodist cemetery. Dr. Peck, which is one of my upcoming books, hope to publish in the next year or so. It's called He Loved the Folks, Dr. Edward Jerome Peck of Hot Springs, North Carolina. But he was the only trained medical doctor for many miles, and he served that Del Rio, Tennessee area, Wolf Creek, Hot Springs. There was a place called Slabtown, Tennessee. And we have the book Christie up here because if you've ever read Christie, there's a Dr. McNeil in the book. And he's a very well-trained physician who serves the town folk and who at least starts out not knowing God or believing in God. And that was I believe it could have been based on my second great-grandfather, Dr. Edward Jerome Peck, he was that. He had been trained at Vanderbilt University, but he came back to that small area. And for 40 years, he was the only doctor in town, served as a railway surgeon, served at the Mountain Park Hotel, and many of the babies that were born in that area were all he aided them in the birth of those babies. And so when he died, they called it Peck's Brigade. They came together with the Rumbaugh family, which ran the Mountain Park Hotel, and they erected this monument to him. And you can see there on the upper right-hand corner, it says, in memory of our beloved doctor, and you probably can't read it below it, it says, he loved the folks. And I just love that when I finally got to see that monument, to read that. He loved the folks. That's what they remembered about him. I traveled from there just a little bit down the street, and this is the area that in Ada's journal, after she was born, and I'll try to introduce you a little bit more to her, but after she was born, her family picked out a little spot in Wolf Creek, and they said, we'll call it Glen Ada, right? The Glen of our little firstborn baby girl, Ada. And this is the second house that's been on that property. This is a Sears and Roebuck company kit home that was put there in the 20s, but there was a larger, also white home that burned down, but it was built in 1854. So I made friends with a historian of Carson Newman University named Linda Gass, and she took me on an incredible tour of Jefferson City and introduced me to the area. And she said, you know what, you should go visit the East Tennessee History Center. And I said, okay, where's that? And it's in Knoxville. I've got a friend there. And so they emailed the folks over here, and they even set aside some of the documents like the Judge Jacob Peck's geology journal, which I'll talk a little bit more later. And it just so happened that the exhibit at the time was East Tennessee's marble industry. And they had this beautiful painting to my right up here of Judge Jacob Peck. I'll try to make this brief. Adam Peck Sr. fought in the Revolutionary War. He was my fifth great-grandfather. Also, the ladies up here in the first row, their fifth great-grandfather. And so he fought in the Battle of Kings Mountain with John Sevier, and afterwards he was given a land grant of 5,000 acres in Tennessee. And of course, it was the state of Franklin at the time. So he came down the Holston with his family, and then they settled an area that they named Mossy Creek. There was an old fort there, and they used that as protection. So they founded Mossy Creek, which today is known as Jefferson City, Tennessee. And then they invited families to come live in that area, and then start building up that area. They erected a log chapel, and they started holding services. They actually installed one of their slaves, Uncle John Peck, who Elizabeth Sharkey Peck, who had married Adam, had taught him how to read, and he loved the Lord. They installed him as the preacher, and he was the pastor for the white families and for the black families and for the Baptists and the Episcopalians and the Methodists and everybody. So it was an incredible kind of a place and time where Uncle John was the pastor and preacher for these families. So a lot of the families and congregations in Jefferson City, Tennessee traced their spiritual lineage back to that original log chapel, which eventually was recreated, and they called it the Elizabeth Chapel. And the Elizabeth Chapel was actually used as a hospital during the Civil War and the Battle of Mossy Creek. So I came here to the East Tennessee History Center, and I started doing even more research. And I tell you, I've been on every floor of this building, and all of the different rooms, and the different archives, and the McClung Center. And I just started trying to find as many documents as I could. I've been over to the University of Tennessee, Knoxville Library over here, and found some of the letters that I'll talk about. But it was so neat this was on display when I came that first time, and Judge Jacob. Okay, so Adam Peck Sr., he had a number of children, but one of his sons was Judge Jacob Peck. He was a state senator from Greene County and another county, Jefferson County, I believe, and then he was a Tennessee Supreme Court Justice. There's some decisions that he made that are still talked about, like the Peck decision. And he was actually one of the Supreme Court justices who would rule in favor of slaves. Oftentimes all the decisions would go against slaves, but he would rule sometimes in their favor. And so there you can see I was like, I kind of think I look like him. And so it was just, I appreciate the East Tennessee History Center because it allowed me to connect in a way that I never had been able to with my own history. And then they did a little article about our family visiting Jefferson City. So I was able to speak with the people that live in that current Glen Ada home. And they said, let me send you some documents. And they sent me a photocopy of what is Ada's journal. And what you're seeing up here is the first page of this handwritten Ada's journal. Okay, Adam Peck Sr. had Judge Jacob Peck, married to Sophia Talbot from Kentucky. And then they had a number of children, but One in special importance to me because he was my third great-grandfather, Dr. Isham Talbot Peck. And he married Emma Elizabeth Henderson, who her family had the Henderson Plantation in East Carroll Parish, Louisiana. So they sent me the photocopy of the journal that Emma kept. They had 9 children. Now, she didn't know she was going to have 9 children, but they had 9 children. And when they had that first child, I think she was really excited. Okay, she's 18, 19 years old, had her first little baby girl. And she said, very ambitious, I'm going to keep a journal, a daily, weekly journal from the perspective of my little baby girl. And so that's what we have in Ada's journal is a travel journal, a home journal from 1853 to 1855, and we get to know Ada. So let me share a little bit from Ada's journal with you. There's QR codes in the book, so as I've traveled around, interviewed people, met people, traveled to the locations in the journal, I have videotaped that, and you can scan the QR codes, and I will take you there with me, and you can travel around Wolf Creek and stand by the French Broad River and go to Glen Ada and see what it looks like and the mountains around you. And then I've also added pictures from like the Library of Congress and stuff like that, so you can see what did a scene look like back then, what did a stagecoach look like back then. Ada Louise Peck, my journal, page 1. At Oakland, Tennessee, on the 25th of July, 1853, about 2 o'clock in the morning, I was born. When I was a few hours old, Father put a little switch by my pillow that had been seasoning for me. For some time, all the days are pretty much alike. I was troubled a good deal with the colic and was dosed a good deal. When I was only 7 weeks old, I commenced my travels. On the 9th of September, in a hard storm, we took the stage for Knoxville. It was the first time I had ever seen Mother have on a bonnet, and I stared at her so long, she thought I didn't know her. I laid part of the time on my breast on a pillow, and as I would raise up my head to look about me, Uncle Bill would laugh, and he would say, I looked like a lizard. Uncle Bill, by the way, was William Rain Peck. That's Dr. Isham Talbot Peck's brother, who eventually went from a private in the Confederate military and down in Louisiana, and rose to the rank of general, one of the only folks to go from like the lowest rank to one of the highest ranks. And then he became known as Big Peck. He was 6'6", 330 pounds. He was known as the largest Civil War general. That's Ada's Uncle Bill. This is, 1853, so we're 8 years before the Civil War kicked off, so now he's just Uncle Bill, but eventually he becomes General Peck. We took a steamboat at Knoxville for Decatur, Tennessee, a railroad from there to Tuscumbia, Alabama, 4 days of staging from there to LaGrange, Tennessee, and a railroad for the last time to Memphis. It was such an unpleasant trip, it like to have killed us all. The staging made me so sore that every night I had to be bathed in warm water, and then I never rested well, for the beds were full of bugs. One night they were so bad, Mother sat up and held me all night. Uncle Bill fared better than any of us, for he slept in the stage. The country was very poor and desolate looking that we traveled over. The people not only had mean houses, but they had no idea of keeping them clean or of fixing anything fit to eat. One night we did not get to our stopping place till in the night, and having a bad attack of the colic and no house being near, Pa guessed at the quantity of paregoric. And you stop by the history table, Hudson's got a real old bottle of paregoric, which had not just alcohol, but also opium in it, so it settled the babies right down, and got water out of a mud hole to give me. It was then dark. We had 5 miles to go over a bad road, Pa and Uncle Bill walking ahead in their shirt sleeves, that the driver might see where to drive. I would love to read more, but there's only so much time. So I'm going to stop there, but please pick up a copy and read it for yourself. It's really exciting. I think it's fun for adults to read, but it makes a great gift, I think, for younger kids, or if you have children, grandchildren, maybe a fun Christmas gift for them to read about history, but from that first-hand perspective. It's not a dry history book telling you they took stagecoaches. You actually get to read what it was like to be in a stagecoach, how uncomfortable it was to be in a stagecoach. In the second half of Ada's journal is Emma's letters, and these are awesome too. They're written from 1854 to 1894. Emma, my third great-grandma, had a best friend, okay, and that was Emma Allen, who lived over in Wolf Creek, and she and her family ran the Wolf Creek Inn. Presidents stayed in the Wolf Creek Inn. And when they were traveling over to Hot Springs to go visit the hotel and on a little pleasure excursion, they stopped in and had a meal with this family, and they just connected, and they just kind of fell in love with each other. And they said, well, we should buy land here and have a little mountain, a little summer home. And so they did that, and they built Glen Ada. But they became friends with this family. And wherever they were, whether they were down in Louisiana visiting the plantation, or whether they were in the New Market area, it was actually called Oakland back then. There's still an Oakland, Tennessee today, but this is an Oakland that's between New Market and Jefferson City. It's only on the older maps, not on the new maps. But that is where they had their farm, and so they would write letters back and forth. So what I've done is taken the letters and transcribed about 40 of them, including some letters from Emma's mother, Louise, who was a great writer and a wordsmith. And then I've added some items this is from the 1862 Southern Illustrated News. This is a letter where she's describing the fall of General Turner Ashby and how he died, and then how they had just had a son, and so she was going to name her little boy Ashby. So one of my third great uncles was named Ashby. So throughout the book there's pictures and illustrations and things like that. But I wanted to read to you just a little bit. This is a little bit of a spoiler alert. This is an oil painting of Ada done in 1859 after she died of cholera. And so this is an excerpt from that letter. From Oakland, April 22nd, 1859. The family was in deep grief over her death, and this gives you a snippet of it. My dear Miss Emma, I ought to have written long ago, but I could not. Have you heard that my dear, darling Ada is dead? She was sick only a few hours and died on the 27th of March at 8 o'clock in the morning. Oh, it was so hard to give her up. She had grown to be the best, dearest little darling that ever was. She never seemed so well and bright as she did the morning of the day that she was taken sick. And about the middle of the day was suddenly taken with cholera morbus. We gave her some simple remedies and thought she was better, but a fever came on at dark, which lasted till next morning, when she died, so peacefully and without a pain. We could not get a doctor there till it was too late. And he said he could not have done her any good, that she had congestion of the brain. And he tell us now that he has been watching darling for a long time, and he knew we could not keep her with us. After she was dressed, we kept her 3 days. She looked perfectly beautiful. I put fresh flowers round her every morning. We have here a perfect likeness of her that we had painted. It looks like she was sleeping. She's in a beautiful metallic case with a glass top. So we can look at her again. She is here with us. A vault is built in the yard here above ground to put her in. You don't know how broke up and lost we feel. And she goes on. But I want to share another neat piece of history is that they did bury Ada in a glass top coffin in their front yard right outside of their front door. And when the Battle of Mossy Creek happened, the Union Army decided to take up shop in the Peck home in Mossy Creek at Oakland. And so in some of the Civil War letters that were documented, they say, we have here a very interesting English doctor who's very well set up. Well, they were Confederate sympathizers, and so they weren't too sympathetic to the Peck family because it was the Union Army. But they said, we help ourselves to his rifles, and we help ourselves to his fishing poles. And he's a very interesting guy. He's got one of his family, coffins in the front yard. So every day as these soldiers would walk off to battle, they had to pass by little Ada in her glass top coffin in the front yard. So this is a part of Civil War history. Ada, and this is probably 4 years after she had died. Eventually, that grave was dug up and she was reburied, and you can't see her anymore. She's fully underground, but she's over in the Westview Cemetery over in Jefferson City. When we had our book signing for Ada's Journal about a year and 3 months ago in Jefferson City, I decided, you know what, why don't we try to get some of these Peck family members together? And I'd never heard of anything like that happening. So I put out a call on Facebook and newspapers and everything I could. We had 25 members of the Peck family that came from 5 different states to come together. So if you are a member of the Peck family, please let me know. I'd love to get your information. And it's no cost, but you can become a member of the Pecks of Mossy Creek. And we try to stay connected. And as I publish writings of the Pecks of Mossy Creek, I'd love to make sure that you are aware of those writings. But have had great cooperation and support from the Mossy Creek Foundation. A portion of the proceeds from all of my books in the Pecks of Mossy Creek series go to the Mossy Creek Foundation. Their goal is to build up that historic old district of Jefferson City, Tennessee. And so it's just my way of trying to give back to this town that our 5th great-grandfather founded so long ago. And I didn't mention, I don't want to forget, in 1791 when Knoxville was founded with James White, and we were just over at the James White Fort this morning, but in that document you'll see that Lot 57 was purchased by Adam Peck Sr., so he was one of the founders of Knoxville as well. One of my family members said, Andy, I'm coming and I'm going to bring some old documents and some photographs and some old journals. And I just spent the last couple years putting together Ada's journal, and I said, did you say journals? And so it turns out that Ada, she had a number of siblings, again, 9 total children, but the 3rd child, so it was Ada and then Willie and then Charley, and Charley was incredible. He went to Washington and Lee University. He founded the Mossy Creek Independent newspaper. He also, in his idle hours during the month of April in 1879, he wrote a book called Mary Anderson and Peacock the Mineralogist, the bad luck of a young Southern girl. That was a little bit of a long title, so I decided to call it Charley's novel. But this is a photograph of Charley. And he had traveled the world. By age 21, he had traveled the world. He'd been to Brazil. He'd been to Europe. And in this, he was also a trained attorney. And sometimes he went by professor. And but in his journal, he you can see some of the little clippings here. He would clip out little little photographs or little drawings or illustrations of different ladies or guys, and then he would put little articles and little poems and things like that. It just kind of shows some of his creativity and things like that. He's also a poet. What he did was, I don't know if it was to his own newspaper, but he wrote a serial novel. In my opinion, it's on par with Gone with the Wind, and it is incredible. It's an epic Southern novel that has heroes and has a bad guy. That's Peacock the Mineralogist. And so I want to read an excerpt from that for you. But in addition to that, we get to see a little bit of his young manness. I think he had a little bit of an infatuation with Sarah Bernhardt. He may have seen her when he went over to Europe, but she was a very famous French stage actress. And then he wrote this poem about Sarah Bernhardt that you can see in the book. But what I did is I put a picture of all of those different little snippets and clippings and things like that, and those are in the appendix of Charley's novel. And then I researched them so you can actually see, like, where did that lithograph come from? Then you actually get to see the original painting that it came from, and then I transcribe all of the words that he wrote. So let's just get a little snippet. This is when the shyster, Peacock the Mineralogist, has now convinced this family, the Anderson family, to let him marry their oldest daughter, Mary. Has promised her a honeymoon overseas, and he's going to take her to New York City, and it's going to be amazing. Where does he take her instead? Mossy Creek, Tennessee. So it says this: well, my dear, we're drawing near the station where we will get off, and from there we will make our way to the mountains. It was 8 o'clock in the morning when the train neared the station where the trunks were tumbled out on the ground. It was a dreary-looking place, and it had been raining, which made it only look more gloomy. The place contained only a few shabby-looking dwellings. Mary looked around to see if there was a genteel-looking person among the vagrant-looking crowd that was standing about in the mud watching the departure of the train, but the only relief about the place was the creek, which was covered with moss and gave the place the name of Mossy Creek. She was conducted by Peacock and an old man up to the hotel, which was an old barn of a place kept by the old vagabondish-looking person who went with them. He seated them on his front porch and told them to make themselves at home. Then the old man's wife came out and gave Mary a history of the place and the people, which was anything but favorable, and then left to fix Mary a room. Peacock had walked up the only street in the place and joined in conversation with the crowd of roughs at the post office, which was in the back end of a little grocery store on close to the depot. And there's pictures of that very grocery store in the book that you can see. The office was kept by an old fogey who was a big man among them because he was one of those knowing justices of the peace, usually called squire, and would occasionally get off some vulgar anecdote at which all would laugh uproariously. Again, I would love to read more to you, but I'm going to stop there. Pick up a copy of Charley's novel and read more. There's a poem in the back here of Appendix 2 called Antony and Cleopatra that he wrote out. He didn't write it. It was written by a man named William Haynes Lytle, and it is an incredible poem. But I do also want to read to you a poem by Charley, and I love this poem. So it's called Every Day, and it was published in the Morristown Gazette, 12 June 1878. And it's called Every Day. See if you can relate with what Charley was going through in 1878 as a young man. Oh, trifling tasks so often done, yet ever to be done anew. Oh, cares which come with every sun, morn after morn, the long years through. We shrink beneath their paltry sway, the irksome calls of every day. The restless sense of wasted power, the tiresome round of little things are hard to bear as hour by hour its tedious iteration brings. Who shall evade or who delay the small demands of every day? As I read, I want you to keep in mind that Charley was one of 3 children in the Isham Talbot Peck family who took their own lives as a young person. One took their life at 16 years old, and then Charley and his brother Ashby took their life about age 24 or 25, all overdosing on laudanum. Third verse, the boulder in the torrent's course, by tide and tempest lashed in vain, obeys the wave-whirled pebble force, and yields its substance grain by grain, to crumble strongest lives away beneath the wear of every day. Some find the lion in his lair, some track the tiger for his life, and wound them ere they are aware, or conquer them in desperate strife. Yet powerless we to scathe or stay the vexing gnats of every day. The steady strain that never stops is mightier than the fiercest shock. The constant fall of water drops will groove the adamantine rock. We feel our noblest power decay in feeble wear with every day. We rise to meet a heavy blow. Our souls a sudden bravery fills, but we endure not always so the drop by drop of little ills. We still deplore and still obey the hard behests of every day. The heart which boldly faces death upon the battlefield and dares cannon and bayonets faints beneath the needlepoints of frets and cares. The stoutest spirits they dismay the tiny stings of every day. And even saints of holy fame, whose souls by faith have overcome, who move amid the cruel flame, the molten crown of martyrdom, bore not without complaint away the petty pains of every day. Ah, more than martyr's aureole, and more than hero's heart of fire, we need the humble strength of soul which daily toils and ills require. Sweet patience grant us, if you may, an added grace for every day. Charles Talbot Peck. It's powerful, huh? Very powerful. About 3 months ago, I was able to publish Oblique City, Wolf Creek, Tennessee. This is a business prospectus written in 1894 by Lewis Washington Murch. He had found somehow Wolf Creek, Tennessee, fell in love with it, made some deals with some folks in Newport, Tennessee, and they said, yeah, let's put up some factories. Let's make a temperance city in Wolf Creek, Tennessee. We'll put factories right along the French Broad River. It'll be awesome. And they were going to build a Masonic hall and a church and a school and everything right there. And so they built this, they created this book and they delivered it to anyone that was interested or might be interested in investing in Wolf Creek, Tennessee. I want to share just briefly, this is a poem that actually appears throughout the book, but I put it together all in one place, and it's called Down in Tennessee. So it says, to the sweet sunny south where so much I delight, to the grand old forests to roam, where the mockingbirds sing so sweetly at night, to the south we invite you to come. Come to Wolf Creek, build you a home, where malaria and consumption never are born. Then come to Wolf Creek, we invite you to come, where cyclones and blizzards never are known. Dame Nature has with motherly love and care placed a chalybeate spring close by from which we drink, and breathing the pure mountain air, health is restored. In truth, it equals Ponce de Leon's fount of youth. For here neath mistletoe and myrtle's lovely green, neath azure skies where gentle zephyrs fan the cheek, we'd have a lovely cozy nook by mortals seldom seen. 'Twould be a restful haven for weary souls to seek. Lewis Murch hired a photographer to take photographs, and so there's 32 photographs that he took that were turned into woodcut lithographs, and they're turned into woodcut drawings that appear throughout the book. So it captures what did Wolf Creek look like in 1894. There's portraits of the men that were involved from Newport and Alabama, and it is a really interesting book. In the front of the book, I've got QR codes, so if you want to learn what happened, did Oblique City come to be? Are there manufacturing plants up and down the river there? You can scan these QR codes, learn what happened to the folks in that area, what happened with Oblique City, what happened to the land that was purchased, and you kind of get to learn the rest of the story. So that's Oblique City, so feel free to pick up a copy of that. To be honest, it's so fun for me just to travel and to take my children and to introduce them in person to their history. After we went to the Rose Glen Literary Festival last year, I took my son to Wolf Creek just to visit with Betty and her son Al. And Al said, hey, you should go visit the Wolf Creek Falls. So I said, sure, let's do it. I looked up the directions. We went to the Wolf Creek Falls, took some photos and videos. And then I was honestly just doing research, and I wanted to learn more about my family because the Peck family is mentioned in Oblique City as well. There's pictures of that original Glenada home in here. And I came across figure 18, the Minnehaha Cascade of Wolf Creek, on Wolf Creek. And I said, gosh, does that look like Wolf Creek Falls, right? And lo and behold, it is Wolf Creek Falls. But to the folks in Wolf Creek, did you know, to the folks of Hot Springs, did you know that Wolf Creek Falls is actually the Minnehaha Cascade? And it tells the story of why they call it the Minnehaha Cascade in the book. So I'm starting to wind down here. My goal and our goal with Cross Mountain Books is to create engaging books that inform, educate, and inspire. I love to connect people with stories and first-hand accounts that help open a window to our history. I'm devoted to preserving stories and writings in their original form so readers can engage, study, and learn from historical texts. One of my passions and desires is to introduce these books to schools and to homeschooling groups and cooperatives, to get it as homeschool curriculum as well, because I want kids to be able to learn history, but not from a textbook, but from primary sources, because I think it's going to connect with kids in a different way. And what I find is, as I unearth these photographs, and here's one that I had colorized, but as I learn more about Isham, I feel like Isham sometimes is even looking back at me. If you look at Isham, you might even get that impression as well. Scary. In addition to He Loved the Folks book, I'm really excited about introducing you guys to Dr. Isham Talbot Peck. I feel like I know him. I've researched him and his life so much. He wrote about 40 letters to the editor of the Morristown Gazette in the 1860s to the 1880s. And he talks about church life, and he talks about farm life, and he talks about life when he was on the Henderson plantation after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed. And there's slaves, freed slaves everywhere coming up to him and talking to him about what they're going to do now. And he talks about how so many of the young men said, I'm going to be a preacher. And he talks about how there were some theological disagreements, and some of the freed slaves were going off to kill a person because they disagreed with them theologically. And he talks about how he confronted them and said, you can't do that, you know? And so it's a time period piece that just introduces you to that time period. And I look forward to sharing that with you. Again, there's QR codes in the book. If you want to, you can hold up your phone. This one's big enough and scan it, and it'll take you to a video that I did as I walked through Wolf Creek and as I walked through the Westview Cemetery, and take you to the monument to Ensign Adam Peck Sr. there. So those are some of the features of the book: the QR codes, the indexes in each of them, so you can do research, family research. I was showing one of the folks that came earlier, if you want to research the foods that they were eating, the plants that they were planting, the prescriptions they were sharing, all of that's in there. And then again, I love the primary source material. Upcoming projects I hope to publish in the next couple years as I'm able to find time. Sawbones, He Loved the Folks. Emma's Songs. Last year on my way back home, I went to go visit Ann Peck in Decatur, Georgia, and she said, "Have I ever talked to you about Emma's songbook?" I said, no, you've never talked to me about Emma's songbook. And she brought out this incredible 1830s songbook that has Emma Elizabeth Henderson engraved, embossed on the front, and it's got like 50 to 100 songs from the 1830s, including the Star Spangled Banner, and it's all of this original piano music that she must have played and sang and that the family enjoyed. There's original writings in there and musical notations and things like that. So that's one of the things I've already photographed it, but I look forward to trying to get it into some form that I can share with the public, and if someone was interested in musical history, they could learn about what were the songs that were played at the time. And then Judge Jacob's Geology Journal is amazing. It's housed in the McClung Center here, but I hope to publish it one day and share it with the world. In closing, I want to say thank you to the East Tennessee History Center and to everyone who's helped make this possible. And then I would like to open it up for questions if you have any. Thank you. Anyone have any questions? Yes, sir.
I was thinking back to Ada's, when you were describing Ada's and Glen Ada, and
Yes.
The home burned down, and then the second home was built in that place. Did Pecks build that second home?
They did.
Peck family?
Dr. Edward Jerome Peck was still living in the Wolf Creek area when they purchased that home. Yes, sir.
So then, the original manuscripts for Ada
Yes, sir.
and for Emma, where are those housed now?
Great question. When I published Ada's journal, I didn't know. I had gotten photocopies from the people that live there now. I knew other folks that had photocopies. I thought that maybe they were somewhere in the archives of the University of Tennessee or somewhere that I didn't know. And about 3 days before the book signing, one of my third cousins said, "Andy, I'm coming, and I'm bringing the original Ada's Journal." And so when we went to Jefferson City and we did that book signing, we had the original Ada's Journal out on the table for people to look at. So it's owned by the family, by my third cousin.
Emma's letters as well?
Emma's letters, again, a lot of people, at some point, they got photocopied, and so that's how I got many of them. But over at the University of Tennessee in their special collections, they have a lot of the originals. And so I spent many hours just photographing those originals. And then when COVID hit and the Air Force said, "Andy, don't come to work, stay home," I had energy like I couldn't tell you. And so when my family went to sleep at 9 o'clock, I stayed up from 9 p.m. till about 2 a.m. every day for approximately 4 months. And I transcribed these old letters and did research and then put it all together.
Thank you.
Yes, sir? What other questions do you have? Okay. Well, myself, I would love to answer your questions personally, and then Hudson's over here to share with you the history table. So we will we'll end the presentation there, but please come up and grab a book. I'd love to share them with you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.